right, guys, so this is a short section. It's called Using the Square Root Property. It's definitely on your test, definitely on the final. It's a technique that we're going to use to solve quadratic equations. So just take a minute and let's fill in these numbers that are called perfect squares. If you need your calculator, go for it. I'm just going to fill these in. 2 squared, 3 squared is 9. 4 squared is 16. 25. 6 squared is, down here is 36. 7 squared is 49. 64. 81 and 100. Okay, so that's going from the left to the right direction. Now we're going to start going from the right to the left. All right, so I'm going to say, okay, guys, what number, when I square it, gives me 9? So this is the number that's been squared. What number did we square to give us 9? Okay, this chart gives us what's called the principal square root. And that is the number 3, right? Because 3 squared gives us 9. But isn't there another number when we square it that will give us 9? Is it negative 3 times negative 3 equal 9? Yeah. So this is something that we have to think about when we use our calculators to solve these. Now, I bet you guys can tell me one of the numbers such that when I square it, this is the number that's been squared to give me 25. So the number that we squared to give us 25 is 5. And don't forget that negative 5 times negative 5 also gives you 25. So that there are 2 numbers that when we square them will give us 25. Now, sometimes you're going to get a number that's not a perfect square. So, for example, like x squared equals 3. What number do I square to give me 3? That's not quite so easy. So, what you have to realize is the square root symbol is a symbol that will undo a perfect square. All right? So if you were sitting and you're like, I can't remember what number that I squared to give me 81. Well, it's all about undoing operations. So for example, addition will undo subtraction. Same thing goes with square roots and squares. To undo a square, we can take the square root. So this square and this square root cancel each other out. They undo each other. So the x will fall down, and then you can go to your calculator and find the square root of 81. So square root is right above the x squared. Do you see that? So we're going to hit second square root of 81 and hit enter. So there we go. So x is going to equal, now don't forget, it's going to be plus and minus 9. Positive 9 and a negative 9. And that's what that symbol means there on your paper. So to find what number, so that when I square it, it gives me k, what we've done is we take the square root of both sides and just don't forget about the plus or minus in the front. And then these will undo each other and you're left with that expression, or that equation. So let's go ahead and do this one. So what number did I square to give me 3? So we're going to take the square root of both sides. The square and the square root cancel. And then we're going to come over to our calculator and we're going to hit the square root of 3. Now that is not helpful. So don't forget there's that change key. If you don't like the way the calculator presents something, you hit that double triangle, that's change, and it'll give you a different form of that number. So if they ask you to round it to 2 decimals, you could say plus or minus 1.73, or however they want you to round it to. Now this says what number, such that when I square it, it gives me negative 16. Well, let's see what our calculator gives us. If we try taking the square root of negative 16, do you see you get an error? Because you're saying what number when I square it gives me a negative 16. No matter what, if you square a positive or if you square a negative, you'll always get a positive value. So this x does not exist because negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16. So you cannot take the square root of a negative number, and your calculator will remind you of that. You'll get an error. All right, so let's practice, especially practice with the change key. It says round your answer to the nearest hundredth. Hundredth is 2 decimals. So let's take the square root. You have to hit the second key first, and then the x squared key of 20. If that's not a decimal, hit the change. You'll get 4.47 if you round that to 2 decimals. All right, let's try the square root of 28. Change. Did you guys get 5.29? Right. Square root of 17. Don't like the answer, so you got to hit change. So 4.12, rounding these to 2 decimals. And then the square root of 50, change, 7.07. All right, so let's jump into solving some quadratics using square roots. So if you're going to use the square root property to solve a quadratic, the first step is to get the squared term by itself. All right, that's the very first most important step. So here's the term that's been squared. So to get that by itself, we're going to undo subtraction by adding. So that'll be x squared equals 25. And then to undo the square, we take the square root of both sides. What you do to one side, you got to do the other. The square and the square root cancel. And then don't forget, you have to put a plus and minus in front of that root key. And the square root of 25 is 5. So you have 2 answers. X is equal to 5 and x is equal to negative 5. All right. For this one, the squared term is already by itself. Do you see that? So now, to undo the square, we can take the square root of both sides. So the square and the square root cancel each other out. This is going to give you plus and minus root 36, which is just 6. So now we're going to have 2 answers. Now look, we're going to have to subtract 4 from both sides. So x is going to equal plus or minus 6 minus 4. So we're going to have 2 answers. We're going to have positive 6 minus 4 and negative 6 minus 4. So our 2 answers for that will be 2 and negative 10. You doing okay? All right, let's try. And you know what? You can check these. Here, let me just go ahead and look at the original problem. We'll check them. You ready? You don't have to write this down, but we can watch. So we'll have 2 plus 4 squared. That equals 36. I'm going to write it exactly how I saw it at the beginning. Parentheses. We'll have negative 10 plus 4 squared. Do you see how they both equal 36? So you can always check your work. All right, let's come up here. So the squared term is by itself. Do you see that? So get the squared term by itself, and then you can go ahead and take the square root of both sides. So the square and the square root cancel out. So you'll have x minus 7 equals, don't forget about the plus and minus, square root of 81 is 9. So then we got to get the x by itself, so we'll add 7 to both sides. So x will equal plus or minus 9 plus 7. So here's our two answers. We'll have positive 9 plus 7 and negative 9 plus 7. So your two answers will be 16 and negative 2. X equals 16 and x equals negative 2. And you can pop those into the original equation and you'll see that those are good looking answers. So why don't you give this one a try? Go ahead and stop the video and see how you do. All right, you ready? So did you, since the squared term is by itself, did you take the square root of both sides? So you'll get 2x minus 4, since the square and the square root cancel each other out. And then don't forget about your plus and minus. And we can actually take the square root of 36, which is 6. So now I have to add 4 to both sides. So we'll get 2x equals plus or minus 6 plus 4. And then we have to divide both sides by 2. All right, so that's not a problem. So we'll have two answers. We'll have 6 plus 4 divided by 2, and then negative 6 plus 4 divided by 2. So that's 10 over 2, which is 5. And this is, and you can just do all these on your calculator. This is negative 2 over 2, which is negative 1, right? You could just put this into your calculator, right? We've got our fraction, negative 6 plus 4, all over 2, right? So you can just work those through on your calculator. All right? So now this one, hey, the squared term is not isolated yet. I mean, we're talking about the whole thing. We want just something squared. So in order to get there, we're going to have to subtract 5 from both sides. And then we're going to have to divide both sides by 4. We just want something squared. That's it. So this, in this case, is x squared equals 1/4. So now I'm in the clear. So I can take the square root of both sides. So the square and the square root will cancel. And if you want, you can just take the square root of fraction 1 over 4. You could do that on your calculator if you wanted. It's 1/2. So the answer then is plus or minus 1/2. Don't forget that there's two answers, right? You got to remember the plus and minus that goes in front of this square root symbol. All right. And then last one. So the squared term is all by itself, right? You have something squared. There's nothing hanging out with it. So we'll just jump right into the square root. The square and the square root cancel out. So we'll have 2x minus 3 equals, I'm going to put the plus and minus in right now. Square root of 25 is 5. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides. And you can't, because of that plus and minus, you can't add those yet. We're just going to always leave that till the very end. You can't say plus or minus 8. That doesn't make any sense. All right? It's plus or minus 5 plus 3. And then we'll divide everything by 2. And then we'll go ahead and figure out the two pieces. So we'll have 5 plus 3 divided by 2. And then negative 5 plus 3 divided by 2. Do you see? One has a positive 5 and one has the negative 5. And you can go ahead and do that on your calculator. So that's 8 over 2, which is 4. And that's negative 2 over 2, which is negative 1. So these aren't too terrible, right? The only twist is just the directions. So they say find the x-intercepts and write your answer as an ordered pair. But we're going to do this using the square root property. So look, an x-intercept is when y equals 0, or when that f of x value equals 0. I can get the squared term by itself pretty easily. Do you see that? So I'm going to add 16 to both sides. So then we'll have x squared equals 16. So to undo a square, I'm allowed to take the square root of both sides. Just don't forget about the plus and minus. So the square and the square root cancel, so x comes out. And then what's the square root of 16? It's just 4. So the two answers are 4 and negative 4. So to find an x-intercept, you set y. Oh, write your answer as ordered pairs. Man, I would have gotten a point off. So x would have been 4, and then x is negative 4. There you go. That's what they want on the final. Oh, as ordered pairs. Don't forget the ordered pairs. All right. So to find the x-intercept, you set the y or the f of x equal to 0. So now we've got to get this by itself, the squared term by itself. So I'll add 17 to both sides. So then 17 is going to equal x squared. Then to solve for x, we'll take the square root of both sides. So that will come down, and that will give me plus or minus root 17. Now look, this is not a perfect root. So that's why it says round to the nearest hundredth where necessary. So we'll take the square root of 17, hit the change button. So we'll get x is equal to plus or minus 4.12. And then, so I don't get a point taken off, we'll write this as an ordered pair. There you go. All right, last one. Okay. So we're going to set my f of x equal to 0. Okay. So I need to get this by itself. So let's subtract 16. So we'll have negative 16 equals negative 4 times x minus 2 squared. It's not self yet. Let's divide both sides by negative 4. I'm running out of room. So here, I'm going to bring it up over here. So negative 16 over negative 4 is 4. So now we're good to go. So now that squared term is by itself. So to undo the square, we'll take the square root of both sides. These cancel, so we're left with x minus 2. And then don't forget the plus and minus when you take the square root. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So we'll have plus or minus 2 plus 2 equals x. Okay, so let's write down both of our answers. I'll do them in blue right here. So we'll have 2 plus 2 and then negative 2 plus 2. So it looks like x is going to equal 4 and 0. So as an ordered pair, let's sneak it in. You ready? So 4 comma 0 and 0 comma 0. Those are the two x-intercepts that would be on that graph. All right? Whew! There you go. So let me know if you guys have any questions, okay? One more video to go. It's good things, good things. All right, we'll talk to you soon.